In today's lesson, we will be talking about properties of exponents. The first property we're going to talk about is anything to the 0 power, and that always equals the number 1. So if it was a number to the 0 power, it would equal 1. If it was 5x to the 0 power, it would also equal 1. Or even if I gave you 3 divided by x times y, if it was all to the 0 power, it would equal 1. The second property we are going to look at is if there is a negative exponent. So if you are given a negative exponent, it makes it move to the denominator and it becomes positive. The same is true as if a negative exponent was in the denominator, it would move to the numerator. So it just switches where it's at. So let's look at maybe 2 to the negative third power, okay? So it's going to move to the denominator since it's negative, and it becomes 1 over 2 to the positive third power. If I gave you x over 4 to the negative second power, since the negative exponent is in the denominator, it's going to move to the numerator, but the x doesn't change. So that gives you x times 4 to the second power, and normally we will write those in a different order. If we are multiplying two things with exponents, first you need to check to make sure that they have the same base. If they have the same base, you just write it once and you get to add their exponents. So if I gave you an example of x to the second times x to the third, you get to just write the base of x and then you get to add 2 plus 3 and that gives you x to the fifth power. If I gave you 3 to the fifth power times 3 to the sixth power. Again, since the bases are both the same, you get to write 3, and then you add 5 plus 6, and that gives you 3 to the 11th power. When you have two things with exponents, again, make sure they have the same base, and you are dividing them. You take the base, and now you take the numerator's exponent and subtract the denominator's exponent. So if I gave you x to the fifth divided by x squared, you would take the exponent on the top, subtract the exponent on the bottom, and that gives you x to the third power. If you had 3 to the seventh power divided by 3 to the fourth power, you would take the 7, subtract the 4, and you would get 3 to the third power. The next property is if you have two things being multiplied together inside of a parenthesis being raised to the exponent, it means you distribute the exponent to both of them. So it would be a to the n power, b to the n power. So if I gave you 2x to the third power, the 3 would go to the 2 and it would go to the x, which gives you 2 to the third power, x to the third power. They could be totally different things, maybe an x and a y, and if it was to the fifth power, it would go to both, x to the fifth, y to the fifth. The last property was where two things were being multiplied together in a parenthesis. This is the exact same thing, only division happening. You distribute the exponent to both the numerator and the denominator, so it would give you a to the n power divided by b to the n power. So if you had x over y to the second power, it would go to the top, and it would go to the bottom, which would give you x to the second over y to the second. Okay, if you had 3 over x to the fourth power, the 4 would go on the top and the bottom, and it would be 3 to the fourth over x to the fourth. If you have an exponent being raised to another exponent, you take the two exponents and you multiply them together. So for instance, x to the second power being raised to the fourth power, you take 2 times 4 and you get x to the 8th power. If you had 2 to the third power to the fifth power, you take the 3 and the 5 and you multiply them and you get 2 to the 15th power. Now let's look at some examples that have us do more than one property at one time. Okay, in example 1, we have 3ab to the second being multiplied by 2a to the negative first power, b to the negative fifth power. Now there's a couple of different ways of starting this problem, and depending on how you see it, could change it, but your answer should still be the same. So since it's multiplication, you actually multiply the numbers since they're coefficients, and 3 times 2 gives you 6. Now I need to take the things that have the same base, and when you multiply things with exponents, you add the exponents. So a to the first power, because remember, this is an invisible 1 that's there, I am actually going to add with the -1 from the second a. Okay, same thing with the b's. I take b to the second, and I'm going to add the -5. And now let's simplify, okay? So -1 plus 1 is actually going to give me 6a to the 0 power. 2 plus -5 gives me -3. Now you learned that a to the 0 power is 1, so that goes away. And anything with a negative exponent needs to move to the denominator and become positive. So you're left with 6b to the 3rd power. All of your problems, the exponents have to be positive, and you need to simplify all numbers as much as possible. Our second example is -2x to the 3rd y to the -2nd power divided by 4x to the 2nd y to the -4th power, all to the 2nd power. Again, you could work on the outside and then do the stuff on the inside. I am going to work inside my parentheses first. So take your numbers, and -2 divided by 4 is going to give me -1/2. Okay, now I take my x. Maybe I should make this a little better. Maybe I should just make it a half for now. Okay. I take the exponent on the top and I subtract the exponent on the bottom. Same thing with the y's. Exponent on the top, subtract the exponent on the bottom. So let's simplify. So that's going to give me -1/2. 3 minus 2 gives me x. And then -2 minus -4 makes it a plus, and so that's going to give me y to the 2nd power. Now, don't forget that all of this is being raised to the 2nd power, so the 2 needs to be distributed to everything. The 2 needs to go with the 1, the x, the y squared, and the 1/2, if you want to think of them all separately. So -1 to the 2nd power becomes +1. X to the 2nd power becomes x to the 2nd power. You multiply these two exponents together, so 2 times 2 gives you y to the 4th, divided by 2 to the 2nd power. And then you guys know what 2 to the 2nd power is. I simplify that to 1 or to 4, and that just leaves me with x squared y to the 4th in the top, because you don't need to write the 1 out in front anymore.